The boundaries and people-pleasing breakthrough. Stop people-pleasing, overcome codependency, and set boundaries to reclaim your self-worth, confidence, and emotional freedom by Grace Pemberton. Introduction. In 1928, a man named Buster Keaton stood on a movie set in Hollywood. He was known as the Great Stone Face. No matter what happened around him, trains crashing, houses falling, or bridges exploding, he never smiled. He never even blinked. He was the master of his own body. In one of his most famous scenes, the entire front of a 2-ton house fell on top of him. He survived only because he stood in the exact spot where an open window landed. If he had moved an inch to the left or right, he would have been crushed. Keaton was a genius of control. He did his own stunts. He directed his own films. He knew exactly where to stand to stay safe. But while he could control a falling house, he could not control a conversation. He could not say the word no to the people in suits who ran the big movie studios. He was a safety seeker. He wanted everyone to be happy. He wanted the system to keep moving. When the big bosses at MGM told him he had to give up his independent studio and work for them, he felt a knot in his stomach. He knew it was a mistake. He knew his creative spark would be snuffed out. But the pressure of their expectations was heavier than that 2-ton house. He didn't want to be difficult. He didn't want to cause a scene. So he said yes. That single yes changed his life forever. He lost the right to make his own choices. The studio took his ideas and flattened them. They turned the master of silent comedy into a bit player in bad movies. He began to drink. He lost his wealth. He spent years wondering how he had let his own life slip through his fingers. He later said he was a prisoner of his own silence. He had built a career on being the man who never moved, only to find out that his inability to move his lips and say no was the thing that finally crushed him. The invisible weight. Most of us aren't standing on movie sets with houses falling on us. But we know exactly how Buster Keaton felt. We know that heavy, silent pressure that comes when someone asks for just one more favor. We know the feeling of a phone vibrating in our pocket and the instant spike of anxiety that follows. We know the hollow sound of our own voice saying, "Sure, I can do that," while our brain is screaming, "Please, not again." This is the hidden life of the people pleaser. It is a life lived in the shadows of other people's needs. You might be the reliable one at work who always stays late because a coworker has a thing. You might be the peacemaker in your family who listens to your mother complain for 3 hours because you don't want her to feel lonely. You might be the friend who always picks up the check, even when your own bank account is low, because you don't want to seem cheap. On the outside, you look like a hero. People call you sweet, helpful, and the glue that holds us together. But on the inside, you feel like you are disappearing. Every time you say yes to something you hate, you are saying no to yourself. You are building up a self-worth debt. This debt isn't paid in dollars. It is paid in lost sleep, constant headaches, and a slow-burning resentment that makes you want to go into a room, lock the door, and never come out. Truth is, people-pleasing isn't about being nice. It is a survival strategy. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being useful was the only way to be safe. You learned that if you could just keep everyone around you happy, you wouldn't get hurt. You wouldn't be rejected. You wouldn't be alone. You became a mood sponge, soaking up the stress and anger of everyone in the room so they wouldn't have to feel it. But sponges eventually get full. They get heavy. They stop being able to soak up anything else. And eventually, if they aren't squeezed out, they start to rot. The Great Transformation. You are likely reading this because you are tired of rotting. You are tired of being the person who saves everyone else while you are drowning. You want to stop feeling used. You want to be able to decline a request without feeling like a criminal. You want to know who you actually are when you aren't busy fulfilling someone else's version of you. This book is the blueprint for that change. You are going to move from being a safety seeker to being an authentic architect. An authentic architect doesn't build walls to keep people out. Walls are cold and lonely. Instead, an architect builds gates. A gate is a boundary that you control. You decide who comes in and who stays out. You decide when the gate is open and when it is locked. You treat your time, your energy, and your heart as sacred resources. You realize that saying no to a bad request is the only way to say a meaningful yes to a good life. By the time you finish these pages, you will be able to handle disagreements without your heart racing. You will be able to look at a friend and say, "I can't help you with that this weekend," and then go home and eat dinner without a second of guilt. You will move from a life of superficial niceness to a life of genuine intimacy. Real love doesn't grow in the soil of obligation. It only grows in the soil of honesty. This isn't just a theory. This is a framework backed by decades of research into sociotropy, the clinical term for the desperate need for approval. It is built on the inner citadel of Stoic philosophy and the hard-won lessons of history's most powerful leaders. We are going to look at the safety approval loop and learn how to break it once and for all. A Tuesday night in Seattle to see what this looks like in the real world, we have to meet Alina Vance. Alina is 34 years old. She lives in a small studio apartment in Seattle that she rarely sees during daylight hours. She works as a senior marketing coordinator at a tech firm. Her desk is a graveyard of half-empty coffee cups and sticky notes. It is 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The office is mostly dark, except for the fluorescent hum over Alina's cubicle. She is finishing a report for a coworker named Greg. Greg left at 4:30 because he had family stuff. Alina has family stuff, too. Her own dinner is a soggy salad sitting in a plastic container next to her mouse bed. She hasn't eaten it because she's too busy fixing Greg's spreadsheets. Alina is the yes man default. If a project is failing, it goes to Alina. If a meeting needs notes, Alina does it. If someone needs a ride to the airport, they call Alina. She feels a strange, cold pride in this. She tells herself she is the only one who can get things done. But as she stares at the glowing screen, her eyes are burning. Her neck is so tight it feels like it might snap. Suddenly, her phone buzzes on the desk. It's a text from her younger brother, Leo. "Hey Elle, I'm $200 short on rent again. I'll pay you back next Friday, I swear. Please don't tell Mom." Alina knows Leo won't pay her back. He hasn't paid her back for the last 3 times. She knows her own car insurance is due tomorrow. She feels a wave of heat wash over her, a mixture of anger and exhaustion. She starts to type, "Leo, I really can't right now. I'm struggling too." But then she pauses. She imagines Leo getting evicted. She imagines him calling their mother, Marta, and Marta calling Alina to cry about how Leo is fragile. She imagines the disappointment in their voices. She imagines being the bad sister. She deletes the message. Her thumbs move on autopilot. Okay, sending it now. As soon as she hits send, she feels sick. She isn't a hero. She is a victim of her own inability to say one word. She has just spent money she doesn't have and time she doesn't want to give, all to buy a few hours of peace that isn't actually peaceful. She is living in a state of self-worth debt, and the interest is starting to eat her alive. The path ahead Alina's story is the story of many people. It might be your story. Throughout this book, we are going to follow Alina as she learns to set her first boundaries, survives the guilt waves that follow, and eventually reclaims her life. She is our guide through the practical, messy, everyday work of stopping the pleasing cycle. But we aren't just looking at the present. We are going to learn from the giants of the past who faced these same giants. We will walk with Eleanor Roosevelt, who began her life as a dutiful child, living under the thumb of a terrifying mother-in-law. Eleanor had to learn that her own voice mattered more than the harmony of the dinner table. She went from a woman who couldn't choose her own wallpaper to a woman who stood firm against world leaders to write the Declaration of Human Rights. We will study Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who lived in a world of people who wanted something from him every second of the day. He will show us how to build an inner citadel, a mental boundary that no one can cross without our permission. We will find inspiration in Florence Nightingale. Everyone thinks of her as the lady with the lamp, but she was actually a woman of iron. She had to defy her family's emotional blackmail to follow her calling. She will teach us how to survive being called cold or rebellious when we are simply being true to ourselves. The journey ahead is broken into steps that will take you from the why to the how. We will begin by looking at why we sacrifice ourselves in the first place. We'll explore the fawn response and the childhood deals we made just to stay safe. We will learn how to draw an emotional perimeter. This is the line where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. You will discover the 7 pillars of the authentic self. You can't set boundaries if you don't know what you are protecting. We will tackle the art of the elegant refusal. I will give you the exact scripts to use so you can say no without burning down your relationships. We will face the shadow of people-pleasing, the resentment and passive aggression that happen when we aren't honest. Finally, we will learn how to turn guilt into growth, moving toward a life where you are the master of your own internal throne. This is not a book about becoming mean. It is not a book about being selfish. It is a book about being whole. When you have no boundaries, you have no self. And when you have no self, you have nothing real to give to the world. The house is falling, but you don't have to stand there and let it crush you. You can move. You can speak. You can decide that your life belongs to you. The gate is waiting. Let's begin. Chapter 1: Why do we sacrifice ourselves? From a high-altitude view, the world looks like a giant web of moving parts. If you could hover above a city and see through the roofs of the houses, you would notice a strange pattern. In one home, a man stays up late finishing a report for a boss who didn't even ask for it, just because he wants to be seen as the guy who never says no. In another, a woman agrees to host a holiday dinner she can't afford, smiling while her stomach knots into a tight ball. In a third, a young person says yes to a career they hate because their parents' faces light up whenever they talk about it. These people are all caught in the same invisible trap. They are working around the clock to keep everyone else happy. They are the shock absorbers of the world, soaking up other people's stress and anger so that things stay peaceful. But if you zoom in closer, you can see the price they pay. Their shoulders are hunched. Their eyes look tired. They are physically present, but their own dreams and needs have been pushed so far into the shadows that they are starting to disappear. In 1905, a young woman named Eleanor Roosevelt walked down the aisle to marry her cousin, Franklin. To any observer, she seemed like the luckiest woman in the world. She was entering one of the most powerful families in America, but the web she was stepping into was already tightening around her. Eleanor had lost her parents at a young age. She grew up feeling like an outsider, someone who had to earn her place in the world by being perfectly behaved, perfectly quiet, and perfectly useful. The person pulling the strings of this web was Sarah Delano Roosevelt, Franklin's mother. Sarah didn't just want to be part of the marriage, she wanted to own it. She bought a house for the couple in New York City, but it wasn't just any house. It was a twin townhouse with doors on every floor that connected her side to theirs. Eleanor didn't get to choose the wallpaper. She didn't get to choose the furniture. She didn't even get to choose how to raise her own children. When Eleanor tried to set a small boundary, Sarah would use guilt like a weapon, reminding Eleanor of everything she had done for them. Eleanor spent more than a decade living in this state of dutiful silence. She was the safety seeker, a person who buys peace at the cost of her own identity. She believed that if she just worked hard enough to please Sarah and Franklin, she would finally feel like she belonged. She became a ghost in her own home, a woman who said yes to everyone else while her own soul withered. The myth of the nice person, we often tell ourselves a story about why we can't say no. We call it being a good person. We tell ourselves that we are just more caring, more helpful, or more sensitive than everyone else. This is the great myth of people-pleasing, the belief that our self-sacrifice is a moral choice. In reality, people-pleasing is rarely about being nice. It is a survival strategy. When we feel like we have to save everyone else, we aren't usually doing it out of pure altruism. We are doing it because we are afraid. We are afraid that if we stop being useful, we will stop being loved. We are afraid that if we show our true feelings, people will leave us. We are afraid of the conflict that happens when two people want different things. This myth keeps us stuck because it makes our suffering feel noble. If you believe your exhaustion is proof of your goodness, you will never try to change. You will keep overcommitting and undersleeping because you think that's what a good friend or good daughter does. But there is a massive difference between being kind and being a people pleaser. Kindness comes from a place of strength and choice. You give because you want to, and you have plenty to share. People pleasing comes from a place of debt and fear. You give because you feel like you have to, even when your own tank is empty. When you are kind, you feel energized. When you are a people pleaser, you feel resentful. Eleanor Roosevelt felt that resentment growing like a cold stone in her chest. She once wrote that she was a dutiful child, but a very unhappy one. She did everything she was told, but it never led to the love or security she craved. Instead, it led to a feeling of being trapped. She was paying a tax every single day, the tax of the unspoken no. Every time she wanted to say, "I want to decorate my own home," or "I want to spend time alone with my husband," and instead said nothing, she felt a physical tension in her throat. This is the self-worth debt that accumulates when you spend all your energy on others and leave nothing for yourself. The fawn response. While your brain chooses submission to understand why we do this, we have to look at how our brains are wired. Most people know about the fight or flight response. When you face a threat, like a bear in the woods or a mean boss in a meeting, your body prepares to either hit something or run away. Some people also freeze, staying perfectly still in hopes the danger will pass. But there is a fourth response that is much more common for people pleasers, the fawn response. Fawning is what happens when you try to avoid a threat by becoming useful to the person who is threatening you. If you can make the other person happy, they won't hurt you. If you can anticipate their needs, they won't get angry. If you can merge your identity with theirs, you become safe. This isn't something you choose to do because you are weak. It is a brilliant survival tactic developed by your nervous system, often when you were very young. If you grew up in a house where emotions were unpredictable, fawning was your way of keeping the peace. You became an expert at reading the room. You learned to spot the tiny squint in your father's eyes that meant he was about to blow up, or the heavy sigh from your mother that meant she was about to go into a dark mood. You didn't have the power to fight, and you didn't have the ability to run away. So, you chose the only option left. You became the helper. You became the one who cleaned the kitchen before anyone asked. You became the one who got straight A's so nobody would have a reason to be disappointed. You became the one who never had a bad day because the house was already full of everyone else's bad days. Alina Vance, a 34-year-old marketing coordinator in Seattle, knows this feeling well. If you saw Alina at her office at 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, you would see a woman who looks like a success. She is the reliable one. Her desk is covered in files that aren't hers. She is currently finishing a report for a coworker who left early to have dinner with his family. Alina's own dinner, a cold, sad salad in a plastic bowl, sits untouched next to her keyboard. As she types, her phone buzzes. It's a text from her younger brother, Leo. "Hey, Elle, I'm short on rent again. Can you swing me $200? I'll pay you back Friday, I swear." Alina knows Leo won't pay her back on Friday. He hasn't paid her back for the last 3 times. She feels a flash of anger, but it is immediately buried under a wave of guilt. She thinks about his landlord knocking on his door. She thinks about her mother calling her, crying, asking why Alina isn't helping her brother. Before she even consciously decides to do it, her thumbs move across the screen. "Okay," she types. "I'll send it now." As soon as she hits send, Alina feels a familiar sensation. It's a tightness in her chest and a dull ache in her jaw. She tells herself she is being a good sister. But the truth is, she is fawning. She is trying to manage the emotions of her brother and her mother so that she doesn't have to deal with their disappointment. She is saving them, but she is sacrificing herself to do it. The childhood contract, this pattern almost always starts with a contract we sign as children. We don't use a pen and paper, but we write the terms in our hearts. The contract usually sounds something like this: if I am perfect, I will be safe. If I am helpful, I will be loved. If I have no needs of my own, I will never be a burden. In the 1950s, a researcher named John Bowlby began studying how children bond with their parents. He called this attachment theory. He discovered that for a child, staying connected to a caregiver is more important than anything else, even more important than food. A child who is disconnected from their tribe cannot survive. If a parent is only able to give love when the child is being good or quiet, the child learns that their true self is dangerous. They learn that showing anger, sadness, or even their own excitement might cause the parent to pull away. To stay safe, the child creates a false self. This false self is the one that is always smiling, always helping, and never complaining. Alina remembers the exact moment her contract was signed. She was 8 years old. Her parents were in the kitchen, their voices rising into a sharp, jagged argument. Alina sat on the floor in the living room, her heart racing. She felt like the world was about to break apart. She saw a pile of laundry on the sofa that hadn't been folded. She stood up and began to fold it. She did it as fast as she could, making the edges perfectly straight. Then she picked up her toys. Then she took a cloth and started wiping the dust off the coffee table. When her mother walked into the room, red-faced and crying, she stopped. She looked at the clean room and then at Alina. She took a deep breath and the anger seemed to drain out of her. She knelt down and hugged Alina. "Oh, Alina," she whispered. "What would I do without my little helper? You're the only thing that doesn't cause me trouble." In that moment, Alina felt a rush of relief. She had found the magic button. If she was helpful, the world stopped shaking. If she was a little helper, she was safe. She had just signed her name to the contract. For the next 26 years, she would keep folding the laundry of everyone else's lives, hoping to earn that same hug, that same sense of safety. The cost of the unspoken no. The problem with the childhood contract is that it has a very high interest rate. Every time you say yes to someone else when your soul is screaming no, you are taking out a loan against your own health. Eleanor Roosevelt felt this in her body. During the years she lived under the thumb of her mother-in-law, she suffered from what she called the depressions. She felt a constant, heavy exhaustion. She had trouble speaking up, even about small things. The no that she couldn't say didn't just disappear, it stayed in her body, turning into tension and fatigue. Think of your energy like a bank account. Every person-pleasing action is a withdrawal. Staying late to do someone else's work, $50. Saying it's fine when someone cancels on you last minute, $20. Lending money you don't have to a brother who won't pay it back. Agreeing to a dinner you don't want to go to, $40. Most people-pleasers are living in a massive, self-worth debt. They are emotionally bankrupt, but they keep trying to write checks to everyone else. This leads to burnout, but it also leads to something worse: resentment. Resentment is the poison of people-pleasing. It happens when you realize that you are doing everything for everyone, but nobody is doing anything for you. You start to feel like a mood sponge, absorbing everyone else's stress while your own needs go ignored. You feel used and taken for granted. But here is the hard truth that Alina eventually had to face, and that Alina is beginning to see. People treat us the way we teach them to treat us. If you always say yes, people will always ask. They aren't necessarily mean or selfish. They have just learned that your perimeter, the boundary around your time and energy, is always open. They are walking through your garden because you never built a fence. The turning point, from safety to integrity, the breakthrough begins when you realize that your safety strategy isn't actually keeping you safe anymore. It's just keeping you small. Eleanor Roosevelt's life changed not because she suddenly felt brave, but because the old way stopped working. She realized that no matter how much she tried to please Sarah, she would never have her own life. She realized that her silence wasn't bringing her peace. It was bringing her a slow, quiet death of the spirit. She began to see that the unspoken no was actually a form of dishonesty. When you say yes but you mean no, you are lying. You are not being your authentic self. You are playing a character. And you cannot build a real, deep relationship with another person if you are always playing a character. True intimacy requires honesty. It requires you to say, I can't do that, or I don't like that, or I need some time for myself. These are the bricks that build a real relationship. Without them, you just have a superficial niceness that leaves both people feeling lonely. If you are reading this and feeling the weight of your own self-worth debt, know that the contract can be canceled. You can stop fawning. You can stop being the shock absorber for the world. But it starts with a very uncomfortable realization. You are going to have to disappoint people. You cannot reclaim your self-worth without making someone else angry. If you have spent your whole life being the reliable one, people will be upset when you start setting boundaries. They will call you selfish. They will say you've changed. They will try to use the old guilt trips to pull you back into the web. This is the crisis of compliance. It is the moment when you have to choose between their approval and your own integrity. It is the moment when you realize that being nice has been a prison, and the key to the door is the word no. Understanding your own, why, before we move into the tools for building boundaries, you need to look clearly at your own patterns. You need to see the why behind your sacrifice. The approval trap. Do you feel a physical high when someone praises you for being helpful, followed by a crash when they seem unhappy with you? The conflict phobia. Does the idea of someone being mad at you feel like a physical threat to your safety? The identity vacuum. If you stopped doing things for other people today, would you even know who you are? What are your hobbies? What do you like to eat? What do you want to do with your Saturdays? Many people pleasers find that when they stop doing, they feel empty. This is because they have spent so much time tending to other people's gardens that their own land has become a desert. Alina Vance sat at her desk and looked at the text she had just sent to Leo. She saw the okay on the screen. For the first time, she didn't feel like a good sister. She felt like a person who had just been robbed, and she was the one who had handed over the wallet. She looked at her cold salad. She looked at the report that wasn't hers. She thought about the landscape photography she used to love, the way she used to wake up at dawn to catch the light on the mountains. She hadn't picked up her camera in 3 years. She was too busy. Or rather, she was too busy being useful. She realized that her yes to Leo was a no to her own dreams. Her yes to her coworker was a no to her own health. The cost of her unspoken no was her entire life. As Eleanor Roosevelt eventually learned, you have to find a way to stand on your own 2 feet before you can truly help anyone else. You have to build an inner citadel, a place inside yourself that nobody else can touch, where your own needs and values are sacred. But how do you build that citadel when the world is constantly banging on the gates? How do you separate what you can control from what you can't? How do you stop absorbing the emotions of every person in the room? The answer lies in a philosophy that is nearly 2,000 years old, practiced by a man who had more pressure on him than anyone else in history. He was an emperor, a general, and a father, and he discovered that the only way to survive a world that wants everything from you is to draw a line in the sand. Before you can say no to others, you have to learn how to say yes to your own mind. You have to learn the art of the mental boundary. You have to understand that while you cannot control the wind, you can certainly control your own sails. The first step to freedom isn't a conversation with your mother or your boss. It's a conversation with yourself. It's about deciding where your responsibility ends and where another person's begins. It's about finding the inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius used to stay sane while the Roman Empire crumbled around him. Are you ready to stop being the world's shock absorber and start being the architect of your own life? The path out of the web starts with a single, clear realization. You are not responsible for saving everyone. In fact, by trying to save them, you might be the one who is truly lost. Chapter 2: Building Your Emotional Param. "Caesar, the people in the streets are saying the gods have cursed us because of your choices," the messenger said, his voice shaking. He wouldn't look the emperor in the eye. "The plague is spreading, the German tribes are crossing the river, and the grain ships are late. They say you have failed them." Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent near the Danube River. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and wood smoke. Outside, thousands of soldiers waited for his command. Inside his own mind, a different kind of war was happening. "Do they say I caused the rain to fall or the wind to blow?" Marcus asked quietly. "No, Caesar, but they say you should have stopped it somehow. And if I were to spend my nights weeping and my days shouting at the sky, would the plague stop? Would the grain ships move faster?" The messenger hesitated. "No, Caesar, but the people would see that you care." Marcus looked down at the scroll on his desk. He wasn't being cold, he was being careful. He knew that if he let the anger and the fear of millions of people into his own heart, he would be useless to everyone. He was the emperor of Rome, but he was also a man who realized that his mind was the only thing he actually owned. In that moment, Marcus Aurelius was building what he called his inner citadel. It was a fortress made of thoughts. It was a line in the sand that separated what he could control from what he could not. For a man who had the weight of the world on his shoulders, this wasn't just a philosophy. It was a way to survive, the invisible fence. Most of us live our lives without any fences at all. We are like a house with no front door. Anyone can walk in, sit on our couch, eat our food, and leave their trash behind. When someone is angry at us, we feel their anger in our own chest. When a boss is stressed, we carry that stress home like a heavy backpack. This is the lack of an emotional perimeter. The perimeter is the invisible line where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. Without it, you become what some experts call a mood sponge. You soak up every emotion in the room until you are too heavy to move. You feel responsible for your mother's happiness, your brother's bank account, and your coworker's bad mood. Marcus Aurelius realized that the world is full of external events. These are things that happen outside of us. People say mean things, the weather turns bad, our car breaks down. He argued that these things cannot actually hurt our inner selves unless we give them permission. Think of your mind as a garden. You can't control if it rains. You can't control if the wind blows seeds from a neighbor's yard into your soil. But you are the one with the shovel. You decide what stays and what gets pulled up. You decide where the fence goes. Alina's circle in a small studio apartment in Seattle, Alina Vance sat at her kitchen table. The only light came from a small lamp and the glow of her laptop. She was exhausted. Her brother Leo had just called her crying for the third time that week. He needed money for rent again. Alina looked at her bank account. She had enough, but it was money she had been saving for a photography class she really wanted to take. If she gave it to Leo, the class was gone. If she didn't give it to him, she wouldn't be able to sleep because she'd be picturing him sitting on a sidewalk with his boxes. She felt like she was drowning in his problems. Alina took a blank piece of paper and drew a large circle in the middle. She remembered reading about how the Romans tried to separate their lives into two piles. Inside the circle, she wrote, "My choices." Outside the circle, she wrote, "Everything else." She started placing things in the piles. Leo's rent, outside. Leo's decision to quit his job, outside. Alina's feeling of guilt, inside. Alina's bank account, inside. Her mother's opinion of her if she said no, outside. As she looked at the paper, something shifted. For years, she had been trying to live outside the circle. She had been trying to manage Leo's life and her mother's moods. It was like trying to reach across the street to mow a neighbor's lawn while her own grass grew 10 feet high. She realized that by paying Leo's rent every month, she wasn't actually helping him. She was just keeping him from having to build his own circle. She was invading his perimeter.